You are watching Channel Africa Conversations.
To get the people to understand about how best their country should be run. There is a need for these dialogues, otherwise we'll continue going down the drain.
Let's get into why the FW de Klerk Foundation withdrew from the preparatory task team and the 15th of August convention. You stated it in your intro: lack of transparency, lack of proper planning, mismanagement, misalignment, miscommunication. Those are the reasons.
Also the question of 700 million. In a country and in a time like ours where people don't have food to put on the table, isn't that obscene? Aren't there other ways in which we can use technology to talk to each other?
Hello and welcome to Channel Africa Conversations. I'm your host, Peter Ndoro. And so on the show today, we're going to be taking a look at a very topical subject in South Africa at the moment. South Africa's upcoming national dialogue, an initiative billed as a people-led process to reflect on the nation's future. It's set to begin with a national convention on Friday, the 15th of August in Pretoria. But before the first words have been spoken, the process has already hit turbulence. 7 prominent legacy foundations, including those of Steve Biko, FW de Klerk, and Thabo Mbeki, have withdrawn, citing concerns about inclusivity, transparency, preparation time, and funding. The Presidency, though, insists that the dialogue will go ahead with a restructured organising team, but questions remain. Can it rise above the mistrust? Will it deliver change or become just another talk shop? In the first part of the program, we'll be hearing from Ismail Joosub, who's with the FW de Klerk Foundation, on why his organization pulled out. Then, in a wide-ranging conversation, we speak to Yasmin Sooka, who's a human rights lawyer and former Truth Commissioner, and Dr. Mavuso Msimang, who's an ANC veteran and respected public servant. And they'll join me to unpack what's at stake, draw lessons from the past national processes like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and consider what would make this dialogue genuinely meaningful for South Africa. But first, we turn to one of the organizations that recently withdrew from the preparatory task team of the South Africa's national dialogue, and that's the FW de Klerk Foundation, along with 6 other legacy foundations, citing serious concerns over how the process is actually being organized. The national dialogue, scheduled for 15 August, has been presented by President Ramaphosa as a society-wide platform to reflect on the country's future. Yet questions have been raised about inclusivity, timelines, and also the ability to achieve real outcomes. Well, to discuss the Foundation's decision and what it means for the credibility of the dialogue, we're joined now by Ismail Joosub, who's the Manager of Constitutional Advancement at the FW de Klerk Foundation. Ismail, thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter.
So, Ismail, why did the FW de Klerk Foundation pull out of this process?
Peter, the FW de Klerk Foundation did not pull out of the national dialogue process. We pulled out of the preparatory task team and the planning for the first national convention. We've not given this national convention our endorsement, but I want to kick off by saying that the FW de Klerk Foundation wholeheartedly supports the national dialogue. Thousands of community dialogues per every ward in South Africa. And before we really get into the issues of the red flags itself, we do believe that it is necessary to have a national dialogue in South Africa for the following reasons. The hard sells are that, yes, it will lead to policy change, but systemic change as well. When you consider things like the electoral system in South Africa, is it working? The judiciary in South Africa, is it working? It's not possible to have so many referenda, and would be better to have one large-scale platform to air everyone in South Africa's views. The other thing is that we have a very fragmented social fabric in South Africa, and reconciliation and social cohesion are very important. Let's get into why the FW de Klerk Foundation withdrew from the preparatory task team and the 15th of August convention. You stated it in your intro: lack of transparency, lack of proper planning, mismanagement, misalignment, miscommunication. Those are the reasons. Ultimately, we urge the president to have a short postponement because we believe, Peter, that this 15th of August convention must be a launch pad but the thousands of community dialogues that come thereafter. If we are not adequately prepared, we, the PTT, who've been handling preparations for the last 15 months, say that we're not ready to have this convention be a springboard for the thousands of community dialogues to happen properly, that is, in an inclusive, citizen-led, bottoms-up way, then we cannot put our name to the 15th of August convention and have thus withdrawn.
So you say 15 months that you've been working on this. How is it that it's come to so close before you decided that there's a problem? Surely, months before you could see that this train wasn't going to land at the station that you were planning.
This is why alarm bells were indeed ringing off. We, the Legacy Foundations, have had a number of concerns. We've aired those concerns. FW de Klerk Foundation, in particular, had written a letter to the tripartite alliance of the various foundations, NEDLAC, and the government, to say that things are not moving as we wanted it to move. Yet we still believe in the dialogue process and therefore urge a postponement. The problem, Peter, is we then were placed in a very difficult position when government had been saying that on their side of the computer screen, everything was showing green, that procurement processes were in place, that venues were being secured, that transportation and other logistics were being prepared. Meanwhile, our own monitoring and evaluation committee, as the foundations, were flashing red. Nothing is on track. And it's because of this parallel process that we see was being run that we, the foundation, said, but this is not a citizen-led initiative. This is not a bottoms-up initiative, because we, the foundations, represent a community of constituencies who represent the citizens of South Africa. This is now a top-down, government-led approach, and that's what caused us to go to the president, ask for postponement, and in lieu of that, to withdraw.
Are you then suggesting that the Democratic Alliance is correct when they say that this is a stitch-up by the government and they've hijacked the process just for their own fortunes?
No, the Democratic Alliance is not correct, because the Democratic Alliance raised their views as regards the entire dialogue process. I have faith in the thousands of community dialogues, because I hope that out of Friday's convention will be elected a properly democratically elected steering committee. The Democratic Alliance is referring to the entire IAT process, as we are referring specifically to the national convention itself, as I said, to be a launch pad for those community dialogues. And I think for the Democratic Alliance, just touching on them and particularly and specifically, their views cannot be symmetrical to ours, because they're fighting a political fight with the president of a particular party over the firing of one of their deputy ministers, which led to them using the entire dialogue process as a political foot. We are not using it as a political football. We are trying to safeguard the interests of the citizens of South Africa.
Ismail, we're going to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very, very much indeed for giving us your insights and some clarity on the position that your foundation has taken. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That was Ismail Joosub, a manager of constitutional advancement at the FW de Klerk Foundation, one of the legacy foundations that have pulled out of the preparatory task team for the national dialogue. They haven't pulled out of the national dialogue itself, but they just want it postponed a little bit. And yeah, that's where we'll leave that for the time being. But still, so much more to come right here on this edition of Channel Africa Conversations.
You are watching Channel Africa Conversations.
Right, you're watching Channel Africa Conversations, and our focus now shifts to the bigger picture of South Africa's planned national dialogue, a process that even before its first session has been marred by withdrawals from key civil society players and doubts over its credibility. The dialogue has been billed as a people-led, society-wide process to reflect, reset, and reimagine South Africa's future. The skeptics point to the country's history with previous reconciliation and dialogue initiatives, most notably the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which, despite its landmark role, still faced criticism for the incomplete implementation of its recommendations. Well, to help us unpack these issues, I'm joined by Yasmin Sooka, who's a human rights lawyer, transitional justice expert, and a former Truth Commissioner who helped finalize the TRC's final report in 2003. And we also have Mr Mavuso Msimang, who's an ANC veteran, respected public servant, and conservationist. To both of them, I'll welcome them shortly, but we thank them for joining us on the program to discuss this very, very important issue and to hopefully help us unpack what some of the big questions are. But before we begin, let's listen to a few thoughts from some interested parties. And we first hear from John Steenhuisen, who's the leader of the Democratic Alliance, which is a member of the Government of National Unity, referred to as the GNU in South Africa, whose party withdrew from the National Dialogue in June, describing the National Dialogue as an illegitimate initiative, lacking all credibility, as an insider stitch-up designed so that the ANC can revive its electoral fortunes. He was speaking at a media briefing in Johannesburg on Monday.
I say to you today that this is your plan. Take control of it. Take hands with us and join us in this fight, because the time for dialogue is over. It is now time for delivery. It is now time for action. And it is now time for the majority of South Africans to really start to taste the fruits of freedom in South Africa. A freedom that can only come through the dignity of a job, in a growing economy, in communities where you feel safe, in communities where you have access to services, and in a country with a government that gets up every day working for you, not against you.
Right, let's now start our conversation with my guests, and I'll say welcome to you first of all, Yasmin Sooka. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And to you, Mr Msimang, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa Conversations.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to the discussion.
Let me start with you then and ask you the question, do we need a national dialogue at this time in South Africa's history?
I don't think we've been in a situation since 1994 where there has been so much instability in the country, so much misunderstanding. Fact of the matter really is that of the eligible people to vote, voters, I think about 40% decided to cast their votes. Of the 40% who cast their votes, 40% cast that for the ANC. So to me, that says there is a serious a problem that the population has with the political system. So it is important then to have an opportunity. I just hope this thing can be designed properly to get the people to understand about how best their country should be run. There is a need for these dialogues, otherwise we'll continue going down the drain.
All right, we'll talk about voter apathy a little bit later on, because some would say this is the signs of a maturing democracy. But Ms. Sooka, let me turn to you and ask you the same question. And as somebody who's seen national dialogues, initiatives such as this, and been very involved in one before, do we need another one such as this one?
Let me say that I'm rather jaded by the whole question of another national dialogue, and really the fear that once again it will be political elites talking to each other, and the people who want to see a real change in the way in which they live will not actually be part of it, and their views won't actually be heard. And you saw that demonstrably by the fact that at the outset, I mean, national dialogue should be people-owned, but the president announced his list of eminent persons before consulting with anybody else. You have these 7 legacy foundations saying it's not people-led. The government's driving it, and it's happening too soon. We haven't got the preparations in place. And I think substantively there's a problem. And that is that the question I think we're all entitled to ask, is this going to be another political exercise? And when you look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the moment the commission achieved the political objective of neutralizing those forces who were set to really, they were set against a constitutional state, it had served its purpose. And so on the question of following through on its recommendations, both the question of prosecutions, the question of reparations, you really haven't seen much done. There's R1 billion sitting in the President's Fund, which was really meant to address the way in which communities were impacted by the apartheid conflict. And yet today, nothing has been done 30 years later. And so the question for me is, it's not like we don't know what's wrong in South Africa. It's about political and economic exclusion, which is manifesting in the kind of unemployment, the highest level of poverty and inequality in the world, and it's racialized. It's something we cannot walk away from. So I would need to be convinced that at the end of this exercise, they will implement the recommendations, or else we'll be like the former Truth Commissioners and Judge Zondo rebuking government, because how many years ago did he present his report to the state? Do you see anybody in orange overalls yet? I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. And so my question of trust in any future discussions, I think, is a big challenge, which not only I, but many other civil society people and communities actually are asking the question. Also the question of 700 million. In a country and in a time like ours, where people don't have food to put on the table, isn't that obscene? Aren't there other ways in which we can use technology to talk to each other? People don't even have data. And yet, I mean, we have, 1,000 initiatives planned. Commission spoke to 22,000 people around the country. And what happened? Their views have not been taken into account.
Mr Msimang, the Freedom Charter, what is going to be different from this national dialogue that perhaps hasn't come out of the Freedom Charter? Everybody knows, as we've heard from Ms. Sooka, what is required, what is wanted. Isn't this just re-expressing that which is known?
By the way, I would like to say outright that I'm in total agreement with Ms. Yasmin Sooka, completely. I am not a spokesperson for the government. I think the management of this process has been extremely appalling. What has caused the confusion, I believe, is that when the president announced it, people got the impression that it's the government now preparing for elections, or for whatever reason, it has failed to run the country properly, and it's not trusted. So to the extent that the national dialogue would be associated with the government, then it's really a non-starter. I'm in complete agreement with that. But we are in a crisis. We can't walk away from this thing simply because it's difficult. Other dialogues have taken years and so on. We do need to find a way and do the right thing and get this thing back to where the legacy organizations wanted to go out and consult. I don't know about the budget, the apparent lack of consultation around up to this point is a disappointment. I wish there would be found a way of setting the thing right so that you can proceed with a task that is absolutely important for South Africa now. Freedom Charter, yes, I talked about it not long ago. It set out objectives. One of the key objectives was to get freedom, and that was accomplished excellently. 1994 came, April 27th, and whatever has not been accomplished now it's sad that it hasn't been. But that is a date that marked the end of colonialism and apartheid. 342 years came to an end. Then going forward, of course, all the difficulties that we're discussing now that have necessitated the national dialogue started cropping up. So people want to move this thing, take it to the communities. So as long as that is done, and I think it has to be done, we really need this. Give me the alternative. If we don't do anything because other things have failed, then telling you we're in trouble.
All right. Ms. Sooka, I don't know if you can help here because I'm still struggling to find what is going to be said at a national dialogue that's not known. Um, these ministers, these civil servants are paid good money to come up with solutions. We have ward councillors who are living in the communities that can see what's going on, and surely they know what needs to be done. What is it that they're going to hear at a national dialogue they're not hearing already?
I mean, those questions that you've raised, I think are really critical because I think that every time that we hold these kinds of consultations, we give people hope. And then we dash their expectations because we put what they say aside and we just carry on merrily. So for me, the question is not about hearing from people about their problems. I think people want to know about solutions. People want to know why, when you have this kind of convention, why aren't the majority of people there under the age of 35? That's the constituency you should be talking to. Why aren't we talking to the people who know how to create opportunities and wealth? Why don't we have the people in South Africa who are dealing with questions of technology, with questions of AI, which are putting older people out of work? But that's what young people want to know. How are they going to access those opportunities so that they can, in fact, support themselves? I don't see those people included in the list. And when you go back to the Tunisia model of national dialogue, they brought the trade unions because, of course, that they played an important role. They brought the employer organizations. They brought, civil society groups, and they brought communities. And it was successful because you had people at the table who understood that the country was in a crisis and that to move out of that crisis, you needed to engage. And that's what this should be about, getting business. You know what they talked about a few years ago, an economic codessa. But all of that means nothing if you do not deal with the way in which corruption has become almost an endemic part of the state. And the question of criminality and the way that's linked to politicians, that's what the ordinary man wants to see is addressed.
Again, I keep on saying the same thing. I'm starting to sound like a scratch record now, but even if they said, this is what the solution is, young people sat at the table, this is what you need to do, Mr. Minister, Mr. Ward Councillor. In the end, it is still local government, it is still provincial government, and it's still national government that needs to do the doing.
Yeah.
In your experience, it seems as if, and this is me now as a journalist watching, those people haven't been doing the doing. Why will they be doing the doing after this dialogue?
They won't. And that's the fundamental problem, isn't it? Talking for the sake of talking and ticking boxes to achieve a political moment, which legitimizes your political project. But at the end of the day, that's not what we need. What this country needs to know from the politicians that we've put into power, what are you actually going to deal with a crisis, do to deal with a crisis? I haven't seen that or heard that. And when you see the Auditor General's report on municipalities, at the most fundamental level, they can't cope. We don't have water, we don't have electricity, we can't put food on the table. That's what I would want the politicians to address. And I'm afraid a national dialogue's not going to cut it.
Mr. Msimang, I think you perhaps opened the door of thought for me in particular that maybe it's the way we vote our leaders into power that's the problem. And maybe that's what really this discussion should be about. To get people who we choose that we know are not going to let us down, because the current process chooses a party, and the party within itself decides who leads us, and that can be problematic if the parties themselves are struggling to manage themselves. Is this dialogue, should that not be about how we choose our leaders rather than regurgitating the issues, even talking about the solutions? Because the solutions can be given on a national development plan to government, but they're just not doing it.
I would really like to understand what this Yasmin is ADA is for the construct of the inquiry, of the investigation. She indicates that there are problems and no one is, she's kicking an open door. There's corruption, there are all these things. You can't ask those politicians again who are discredited, who are corrupt, to find a solution. There is a need to find a solution for the things that we're talking about. So find a way then of letting the nation know how this can be resolved. To say you must ask them why they are corrupt or this and that, it won't help. As you say, they'll continue. They've been elected in the manner that they are as councillors, etc., etc. But how can you construct, how best you construct a conversation where people will give these ideas? I'm coming now to your electoral system. I think it's just but one of very many things that people, if you were able to reach out to them and say, we have been sent to find out what bugs you specifically. How should we deal with it? Etc., etc. So for me, the problem with this conversation is we all accept that there are very serious problems. Actually, it's a crisis, but no one is saying exactly how you resolve it. Either you say, let it go and so on.
You've traveled, you've worked in other countries across the continent, and I know that you're very involved in South Sudan now, which we all had hope for when it became the youngest nation on the continent and in the world. I wonder if there are lessons that we can draw from South Sudan that we could take here and say, sadly, this has become another story. This is what we can learn, and this is what we can use to fix South Africa. What are those lessons?
I always feel like such a hypocrite when I go to a country like South Sudan and I say to the president and the politicians that they have an absolutely marvelous, comprehensive peace agreement, but unless they they address the question of the institutional framework and ensuring that every citizen is able to exercise their voices, the conflict's not going to stop. But it's also about them as political elites accessing the resources of the country to benefit themselves. And I think that gap between them and people on the ground is what's also driving the kind of contestation you see in the country. And when I speak about the contestation and the political elite and the looting, I kind of think, but how dare you stand up and say that when the same thing is happening in your own country? Because South Africa, at so many levels, has enormous resources. We have a legacy that we inherited in terms of infrastructure, of systems. And somehow in the last 30 years, we've dissipated them. And so I think that the focus in our country should be on reform of the electoral system, but also the notion of how do we grow our economy, but how do we integrate a value system? We have our constitutional values, we have the question of Ubuntu, but how do you get someone to understand that if you steal from the poorest, that's not acceptable? And that kind of accountability for that kind of action is what's missing in our country. And so my point, if I was to see the president, is say, demonstrate that you are opposed to impunity, demonstrate that you're going to hold every member of your cabinet, every person who's in the executive, you're going to hold them accountable. How do you retain ministers that have done what the Minister of Higher Education did? You fire the DA minister because he went to America unauthorized, but at the same time, you're not exercising that in your own party. And so, with each of those actions, the disillusionment grows. I would also say to Mr. Steenhuisen, every time you raise the question of BE and expropriation, and you say, I'm committed to transformation, you're not. Because unless you recognize the inequality in our country, you're not doing any of us a favor.
Ms. Yasmin Sooka, it's been a pleasure having you on Channel Africa Conversations. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mavuso Msimang, always great talking to you. Your insights always greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining us.
For the ending.
And to my guests, it's been great talking to them. And that's how we come to the end of this edition of Channel Africa Conversations. And just before I go, please, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please comment in the comment section below. But you're probably seeing on your screen right now where you can contact us on our social media platforms and our emails. What we'd like to know from you is what kind of conversations do you want us to continue to have, and with who? And we'll try and organize those conversations so that these Channel Africa conversations are your conversations. From me and the team, until the next time, goodbye.